The wind hadn't spoken in days. It dragged across the plains like an old man's sigh, stirring dust that danced in circles, only to settle again. Out here, between the yellow bones of last year's grass and the frozen belly of the hills, silence reigned, not the kind that comforts, the kind that weighs. Boone Carver rode into town with that silence braided into his coat. He wore it like grief, and it fit him well. His horse, a pale dapple-gray named Juniper, moved slow, as if she too was tired of the land's quiet. Boone hadn't spoken to another soul in 5 days, not since the last fence post cracked in the cold and gave way to nothing but cattle and sky. The letters he never sent sat folded in his breast pocket, 12 of them, all unsigned, all addressed to no one. He didn't come to town often. It was too much sound, too much scent, smoke, sweat, whiskey, laughter that felt hollow. But he needed flour, lamp oil, and nails. That's when he saw her, not the girl, not yet. First, he saw the man, drunk before noon, shirt open to the January wind, arguing with the auctioneer near the feed store. He was thin in that mean way, bone-pale, sharp-nosed, fingers trembling, not from the cold, but from the bottle. Folks had started giving him wide berth. Boone might have done the same, until he heard the word. Deaf, ain't good for. Much, but she's quiet. You want her or not? Boone stopped. The wind paused, like it wanted to hear better. She was small, maybe 12, maybe less, wrapped in an old shawl that looked more like a curtain than a coat. Her hair was tangled, dark as wet bark, and hung in a curtain over her face. She stood still as a fence post, eyes cast down, holding a broken tin cup in both hands like it was her job to not spill the silence inside it. "She yours?" Boone asked, voice low, even. The drunk man snorted. "She was. Now she's a burden. Gonna drink me dead, that one. Don't listen, don't talk, just stares. Look, mister, I don't want much, just enough for 2 bottles and the train." Boone looked at the girl. She didn't move, not even a flinch, just breathed, barely. The air smelled of cold and sour mash. Boone's jaw tensed. He thought of the grave out past the cottonwoods on his ranch, the one with no marker, just a single rock. He thought of how he used to beg God for a sound, any sound, from the crib that never cried. "How much?" Boone asked. $10, the man slurred. "Or trade me a coat." Boone took off his coat. It was wool-lined, stitched by his sister before she died. Warmth still clung to the inside and the smell of cedar. He handed it over. The man tossed the girl forward like a sack of bones. She stumbled, didn't cry, didn't look up. "Yours." "Now," the man muttered, already halfway to the saloon. Boone stood there a long moment, holding the silence between them like a cracked lantern. Then he crouched. "Name?" he asked gently. "Nothing." He pointed to his chest. "Boone." "She." Watched his lips unmoving, then looked at the ground. Boone nodded. Took off his gloves and held one hand out, not commanding, not rushing, just open. The girl stared at it, then after a long hesitation, placed her own small hand inside his. It was cold, feather-light, but she didn't pull away. They rode double on Juniper. Boone placed her in front so she wouldn't fall, arms braced around her gently. She didn't speak, didn't fidget, just sat, stiff and staring, as the town grew small behind them. The wind picked up again, dragging long whispers through the sagebrush. Boone didn't ask questions. He never liked the sound of them. He knew how answers could ruin a quiet moment. He just rode. The ranch came into view near dusk, a modest house, barn half sunken on one side, smoke curling from the chimney like it was still deciding whether to rise or stay grounded. The girl's eyes followed the movement of the smoke. That was the first thing she truly looked at, Inside, Boone stoked the fire. The girl stood in the doorway, motionless. "You can sit," he said softly, gesturing to the rocking chair by the hearth. She didn't move. Boone poured water into the basin, set a clean rag beside it, pushed a bowl of stew toward the table, hoping the smell might call her closer. It didn't. He brought out a box. Old pine, carved with a horse and initials, AC. Inside were small things, tokens from before the silence took root. A tiny wooden horse, a scarf too small for any adult. A book missing its cover, a piece of soap shaped like a dove. He set the wooden horse on the table. The girl stepped forward. Only once. Boone didn't speak. He just turned the horse slowly, letting it catch the firelight, casting its shape on the wall like a shadow. Puppet. The girl stared. Then, finally, she stepped fully inside the cabin and closed the door behind her. That night, Boone lay in his bed with the door to the main room cracked open. He listened. No footsteps. No rustling. Only the soft creak of the rocking chair moving in the faint rhythm of the wind outside. He knew that sound well. It hadn't moved in over a year. He closed his eyes. In the morning, he found her sitting on the porch, wrapped in one of his old shirts. She was holding a letter, not one he gave her, one of his, unsent, folded wrong, as if opened with too much care. He froze. She looked up. Boone walked slowly, sat beside her on the step, reached out, took the letter with a tenderness reserved for ghosts. She didn't look away. He thought to scold her, but her eyes weren't guilty. They were searching, like she hadn't read it so much as listened to it. Boone's voice was rough when he spoke. "Did you read it?" She looked at his mouth, then nodded. A slow, small nod. Then she pointed to his chest, not like a question, like an answer. Boone didn't understand it. Not then, not fully. But something loosened in him, like the first breath after snowfall. She couldn't speak, might not ever. But something in her had heard him. Not the words, the ache, the heart of it. And for the first time in years, Boone, Carver felt seen, not by a town, not by a woman, but by a child who hadn't spoken a single word and yet answered everything he hadn't dared to ask. Snow came the next day. Soft at first, flakes drifting like bits of ash, weightless and slow, then heavier, fuller, until the porch rail disappeared beneath it and the sound of the world was swallowed whole. Boone chopped wood under a slate-colored sky while the girl watched from the window. She stood behind the curtain like she wasn't sure if she belonged to the indoors or the out. He noticed how still she stood, arms crossed, feet together, chin tilted just slightly, like a sparrow uncertain of a branch's strength. He'd tried asking her name once, gently, the evening before. She hadn't reacted. So he stopped asking. Instead, he let the rhythm of routine do the talking. He showed her how to feed the fire with a single log and how to watch for sparks on the rug. He laid out a second blanket for her on the small bed across the room. When he passed her the bowl of soup that night, she took it with both hands and bowed her head. Not in prayer, but in something close to understanding. She was beginning to observe the way of things, and Boone was beginning to learn her language, though it had no words, no grammar. It came in the way her eyes narrowed when the dog barked at the barn door, or how she traced the knots in the table with a fingertip, like each one carried a secret. It was 3 days before she stepped into the barn with him. Boone was cleaning, out the tack, brushing down juniper, and rearranging the feed barrels. He didn't hear the girl come in, but he felt it, a shift in the air behind him, like the presence of something too quiet to be danger, but too alive to ignore. She moved, slowly, one hand grazing the stall wall, eyes wide to the shape of hay dust spinning in the slants of light. Juniper turned her head, ears flicking. The girl froze. "She's gentle," Boone said softly, rubbing the mare's flank. "Watches more than she walks. Like you." The girl blinked. Boone stepped aside, giving her space. Juniper dipped her head, letting her muzzle rest near the girl's chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the girl reached out. Her fingers touched the horse's jaw, delicate and slow. Boone held his breath, though he wasn't sure why. The girl smiled. It wasn't wide, nor sudden. It was a flicker, one corner of her mouth lifting like it had forgotten how, but was. Trying again. Boone felt something tighten behind his ribs. Not pain, not quite warmth, just a shift, like the wind changing direction. That night, she brought the wooden horse to the fire and set it near the hearth. Then she pointed to herself. Boone leaned forward, his voice barely above the crackle of flames. "That yours?" She shook her head, then touched the horse again and pointed to her chest, his brow furrowed. "You want it to be your name?" She nodded. Boone hesitated. "Horse?" She paused, thoughtful, then pointed again, more slowly, as if drawing an idea into place. He understood. "Pony." The girl's eyes lit, bright and fleeting. He nodded. "All right, Pony." Something passed between them then, a contract made of nothing but breath and shared space. And for the first time, Boone realized just how much she'd been listening. She couldn't hear, but she listened. That was the difference. By the end of the week, she moved through the cabin like it belonged to her, in the quiet way of someone who tidies without being asked. She swept ashes. She folded blankets. She fed the chickens without ever startling them. But Boone noticed things too. She jumped at sudden motion. She rarely slept through the night. He saw the lamp burning low in her corner well past midnight, and she avoided the mirror. Every time she passed it, she looked away, like it held a truth she wasn't ready to carry. On the 7th morning, Boone found her standing in the field, facing the open hills. No coat, barefoot in the snow. He ran, heart pounding. She didn't turn at the crunch of his boots, just stood there, rigid, eyes distant. He wrapped his coat around her. "What in God's name?" She turned to him then. Her eyes weren't blank. They were full of something heavy and ancient and unspeakable. And down her cheek ran a single tear. He didn't speak, just knelt beside her. She placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. Boone closed his eyes. The cold burned his knees, but he didn't move. When he opened them again, she had pulled from her pocket something small, a button, rusted and cracked. She offered it to him like a piece of her story. He took it, held it in his palm, warm from her hand. "What was he to you?" Boone asked softly. She didn't answer, but he knew. Not father, not protector, just owner. She'd belonged to someone. Now she didn't. But she didn't know yet what that meant. Later that night, Boone took out a fresh sheet of paper. He sat at the table, lantern flickering, and began to write. Not a letter to the dead this time, but something else. Something. For her. A name. A future. Words she might never hear but could one day understand. He wrote slow, careful as carving. "You are safe here. You are not a mistake. You are wanted." He didn't sign it, just folded it and set it on her bed. The next morning, it was gone, but nothing good grows without weather, and the weather changed. It started with hoof prints at the far edge of the property, then a broken fence line, then a bottle, half empty, tossed near the gate. Boone didn't need a name to know who'd left it. He knew men like that. Men who didn't part with what they believed they owned, especially not when it left them weaker. The next day, Pony didn't come to breakfast. He found her curled in the barn, clutching the wooden horse. She had torn it, clean down the center. Boone crouched. "What happened?" She looked up. Her lips moved. One word. He didn't catch it. She repeated it, slower, eyes full. "Mine." Boone reached for the broken halves, pressed them together. He nodded. "Yes, yours." Her hand found his again, but this time she didn't just hold it. She squeezed. And something in Boone Carver that had been asleep for years awoke. He wasn't just keeping her safe anymore. He was keeping her his. That night, snow fell again, harder, thicker. But inside the cabin, the fire held. And Boone sat beside a girl who'd given herself a name, broken a toy to make it her own, and stared down a past she could not voice. They sat without speaking. But between them, there was no silence anymore. Only a language older than words. A quiet vow. Boone didn't sleep much after that. He kept the rifle loaded and by the door. Every night he listened, not for her footsteps, but for those that didn't belong. Footsteps that might come heavy through the snow, laced with malice and sweat. She knew something was coming, too. Pony had grown quieter again, but not in the way she'd been when she arrived. This quiet was tighter, tucked into her shoulders. She folded her clothes too neatly, checked the locks on the door herself. She began, drawing in the margins of Boone's letters, even the ones already sealed. Half-shapes, like birds with broken wings or small fires that had no smoke. He didn't stop her. Some silences had to be drawn before they could be spoken. One morning, Boone found a package on the porch. No knock, just a burlap sack tied with twine. Inside was a rabbit, gutted and skinned. Clean, but left deliberately. A message. Pony watched him unwrap it and didn't flinch. But she didn't blink either. Boone burned it in the stove. He didn't ask her if she wanted to leave. He'd already decided. They would not be run off by ghosts that still thought they had rights. That evening, he sat by the fire with his letters and watched her. She was kneeling by the hearth, holding the small wooden horse again, now glued back together, the crack still visible like a healed scar. Boone cleared his throat. "Want to learn how to ride?" She looked up. "Properly. I mean, saddle, reins, open field." Pony stood. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She just went and got her coat. They began in the lower pasture. Boone brought Juniper out, saddled and brushed, reins looped over the post. Pony approached her like a ritual. No fear now, just care, a quiet reverence. He helped her into the saddle. The first time she rode, he walked beside her, holding the reins gently in one hand. She watched him closely, mirroring the way his weight shifted, how his fingers pressed when the horse turned. The second time, she took the reins herself. Boone stepped back and watched her ride the fence line, hair catching the wind like a dark banner. She turned once, mid-loop, and smiled, not the flicker she'd shown in the barn, but a full, bright thing, and he smiled back before he could stop it. Not just proud, but hopeful. Spring crept up in fits and starts. Melted snow refroze by dawn. Buds on the trees curled under hard skies, but it came, slow and stubborn. With it came the thaw in her. Pony began humming. She couldn't hear it, of course, but she felt the vibration in her throat, let it ripple, from her ribs to her fingertips. Boone would find her on the porch sometimes, eyes closed, head tilted to the wind, like she was listening to the clouds move. She fixed the old scarecrow in the field, dressed it in a red scarf and nailed a horseshoe to its base. She left feathers by Boone's writing desk, one each day. always different colors. And once, she brought him a paper folded into the shape of a fox. He didn't ask why. He just kept. And then came the knock. Not a bang, not a threat, a knock. 3 slow raps on the door as evening light slid off the window panes. Boone answered with the rifle slung across his chest. A man stood there. Dusty hat, boots too fine, smile too wide. Evening, the man said, hands open. Boone didn't return the greeting. Came to check on something that might belong to me. Boone said nothing. She answers to Lily, or she used to. Sold her on account of some debts, but I figure we can renegotiate, seeing how good she's looking now. Got her color back, I see. Boone stepped forward. 1 step. Don't know who you think you're talking about. The man's smile didn't fade. Now don't make this ugly. Could just be a misunderstanding. But if a man takes something from another man, well, there's ways to settle that. She's not a thing, Boone said, and she's not yours. The man's eyes went flat. Then I'll see you again, he said softly. He turned and walked away like a man who already knew which door would open when he knocked next. Boone stood there long after the dust settled. When he turned back, Pony was standing in the hallway. She'd heard nothing, but she'd seen everything. They didn't speak of it. But she began wearing Boone's old coat when she went outside, even when it was warm. She traced her name in the window frost every morning, not Lily, just Pony, over and over, as if trying to carve it into truth. Boone watched her from the barn, watched the way she moved quieter now, as if she feared being noticed by something not yet here. He knew that feeling. It was the same one he had when a letter was almost done, when the words were just beginning to take shape, but the ending hadn't yet found its place. One day, while checking fence posts, Boone found her sitting near the hill, where the land dropped off toward the river bend. She held a letter in her lap. Not one of his. This one was folded with care, corners sharp, paper smoothed 100 times by her palm. He sat beside her. She passed it to him. He opened it slowly. The handwriting was jagged. Spilled ink, misspelled words. A letter written by someone who'd never learned to mean what he said. It didn't ask for forgiveness, just possession. She'll come back when she's hungry. She always does. Boone folded the letter and held it between them. She won't. She took it back, held it to the firelight, then with no hesitation tore it in 2. Boone didn't move, but his hand reached over and touched her shoulder. She leaned into it, just slightly. Just enough. They prepared after that, not for battle, but for choice. He taught her how to load the rifle, not to use it, but to understand it. He showed her where the key was hidden for the chest beneath the bed. He told her where to run if he ever didn't come back from town. She didn't nod, but she listened. And one night, after all was quiet, she took his notebook from the table. Boone found it later. 1 page, 1 sentence. I am here. And I'm not leaving. He touched the words with his fingers, like they were something sacred. And in that moment, he realized something. She wasn't learning to hear. She was learning to be heard. A week passed without another visit, then another. The moon bloomed full and pale. Calves were born in the field, and Pony's scarf turned from gray to red. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, she brought him a second folded paper. This one shaped like a heart. Boone opened it slowly. Inside, a single fingerprint pressed in red ink. And beneath, one word. Yours. He didn't say a thing, just folded it back and slipped it into his coat pocket, near the place she always rested her hand when she wanted to know if the world was still safe. In the stillness of that evening, as firelight, Played along the walls, Boone wrote one final letter, not to the past. Not to the ones who never wrote back. This one was for her. He didn't leave it on her bed this time. He handed it to her directly. She took it, opened it. Inside, no words, just a drawing of the wooden horse. And beside it, two figures, one tall, one small, walking side by side across an open field. No reins, no rope, just freedom. Together. She looked up at him, and she nodded. The thaw came fully in May. Snowmelt ran like veins through the land. The pasture grew soft under hoof. Boone mended the last of the broken fence rails with Pony beside him, handing him nails without asking, holding boards with steady hands. She'd taken to humming again. This time it wasn't careful or hidden. She did it while brushing juniper, while sweeping the porch, while sitting by the fire at night. She couldn't hear it, but Boone could. And he listened the way one listens to rain that hasn't fallen in years. In the quiet, she bloomed. He saw it in her step, less guarded now in her drawings, bolder, fuller, always including the sun. She even smiled when Boone forgot something, tapping her own forehead like she was teasing herself too. It was not a life without shadows, but it was a life, until the shadow returned. It came not on horseback, but in a wagon, black-tarped, slow-rolling, cutting a cruel silhouette across the high ridge. Boone saw it from the edge of the field, his hand tightening on the gatepost. The figure on the driver's seat wore a broad hat. A man beside him held a rifle across his lap like an old friend. They weren't hiding. They weren't trying to. Surprise. They came like they believed they had the right. Boone said nothing when he turned back toward the house. He didn't need to. Pony was already there, standing at the doorway, eyes locked on the wagon's approach. She didn't move. Not even when Boone stepped in front of her. When the wagon reached the yard, the man with the rifle stayed seated. The other, her father, climbed down slow, dust rising around his boots like something unholy. He smiled like he knew something. Came to collect. Boone didn't answer. You took her. I let it be. But now the debt's settled. She's mine again. Pony didn't flinch. She stepped forward. Boone turned to stop her, but she gently pushed past. She walked to the middle of the yard and stopped, 10 feet from the man who once sold her for a bottle and a bet. He looked her over like cattle, like she was still small and breakable. Lily, he said. She didn't blink, didn't look away. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Boone's letter, the one with the drawing, and unfolded it carefully. Held it in front of her like a banner. Then, slowly, she tore it down the middle. One half drifted to the ground. The other she held tight. The man took a step forward. Boone raised his rifle. You put your boot on this land one more time, he said, calm and clear, and I'll bury you under it. The man stopped, not because of the gun, but because of the silence between him and her. It wasn't fear she showed. It wasn't anger. It was absence. The way someone might look at a dying fire and no longer feel cold. You're nothing to her, Boone said, and you always were. The man spat, turned, and climbed back into the wagon. No threats this time. No words. Just the sound of wheels turning on hard ground. That night, Boone found her out by the barn, brushing juniper by moonlight. He approached slow. She didn't look up, but she reached behind and held out her hand. He took it, and for a long while, neither spoke. The night held around them like a blanket. Cool, still, whole. Then she turned and placed something in his palm. It was the other half of the drawing, the torn page from the letter. The piece that showed two figures. Together. Boone held it like something fragile. He looked at her. She touched her chest once, then his. And then, with quiet certainty, she placed her palm on his ribs, over his heart. It wasn't the first time she'd done it, but it was the first time he understood what she meant. She hadn't needed ears to hear. She'd heard him all along. The season settled into warmth. Grass rose in the field. Wildflowers scattered like soft confetti across the hills. Boone planted a new row of trees along the back edge of the pasture. She named each one with her fingers. Not words, gestures. He began learning them, one by one. He wrote them in the margins of his letters now, even if she never saw. Some nights, she'd come to him holding the little wooden horse, now tied with a red ribbon. She'd set it on the table and wait while he finished whatever words he was putting to page. Then she'd slide the fox-shaped letter into his hand, the one marked yours, and walk to the porch. He always followed, because she wasn't a child anymore, and he wasn't just a man with a quiet past. They were more than what they'd survived, more than the cruelty that had shaped them. They were proof of something else. That kindness leaves echoes. That silence can be chosen. That the heart speaks loudest when left to beat unguarded. One morning, he found her out in the field with Juniper, riding bareback along the fence line. Her hair streamed behind her. Her hands were open, not clutched to the reins. When she saw him watching, she pointed to the sky. Two hawks circled above them, slow and wide. She dismounted, ran toward him barefoot in the grass, and stopped just short. She reached into her coat, pulled out a folded paper, not a fox this time, but a star. Inside, she had drawn a single line. Home is where you are. Boone didn't speak. He just opened his arms, and she walked into them. No, more letters needed. No more proving. She was his, and he was hers. That evening, she left a final gift by his bedside, a small wooden carving, carefully shaped. It was Juniper. But behind the horse were two figures, tall and small, walking through a field of paper flowers. And Boone, before he blew out the lamp, placed it beside the wooden horse and the fox and every letter she had ever given him. It wasn't much, but it was everything. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.